So I'm guessing a certain someone heard that I was planning on going on an RPG binge in the coming months because just recently, Square Enix has approached me to spend some time talking about their Romancing Saga franchise. And as we get started today, this video is made possible by Square Enix and their new Romancing Saga Re-Universe game available on mobile devices. An energetic entry in the long-running Saga series that's not only free to download and free to play, it's accessible to both casuals who just want to kick back and bask in a more traditional RPG world complete with a story that's accessible to newcomers if this is your first Saga experience, and there's plenty for the hardcore player to do, testing their skills in strategy and party formations with a slew of content difficulty levels and added challenges. I encourage that you play at your own pace though. This game's not going anywhere for a while. Featuring near limitless character customization tied together with Saga's style system. Feel that overdrive meter when you can, it really turns the tide when used properly. Go nuts and make parties of your choice, and don't worry about that old-fashioned power creeping that renders your favorite characters useless because Miss Ninja here can rock a sword and a kunai at the same time. Reap all the rewards with daily login bonuses and continue to score big by completing daily and weekly missions, featuring a great soundtrack from Kenji Ito and beautiful artwork from Tomomi Kobayashi, not to mention the oodles of gorgeous pixel artwork, already getting lost in thought. Oh my god, look at all this, I love it. Romancing Saga Re-Universe is a warm and comfy throwback to more traditional RPG fantasies, and from now until September 30th, users who log in for 7 days straight will get a total of 3,000 jewels and a free Boba Rock Bouquet skin, which changes the appearance of the unit for the popular character Rock Bouquet. Not really a fan of Boba myself, but I appreciate the gesture, thank you. Again, that's Romancing Saga Re-Universe, available now on Google Play and on the App Store. It's free to download, and it's free to play. And thanks once again to Square Enix for also gifting me this box of goodies to tie into the game. Got some wonderful postcards featuring some colorful pixel artwork. Now this is classic Square, I love this. It also came with this nifty card holder, which is appropriate because I accidentally just washed my old wallet in the wash like a dunce. Anyway, we got a booklet that covers the Saga series chronological release dates. Just don't look at the Western side or you might get a little depressed. Oh, but I really like these little sprite stands. Make myself a neat little collage here. This is gonna go great in the shelf. Yeah, look at that, that looks great. But this video is not just about raising awareness for Re-Universe. I was also asked, much like a couple of years ago when I did that video on Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn, to spend some time today talking about a Saga game, and I was given a choice between a few of them. What was it? Romancing Saga 2, Romancing Saga 3, or SaGa Scarlet Grace Ambitions. Not quite Kingdom Hearts level, but the name did appeal to me, so I decided I was going to look at that for this video. And much like that video I did on Final Fantasy XIV, the structure for this one is going to be a little different. It's more of a review podcast, starring me, myself, and I, and nobody else. There's no real script. I'm just going off the top of my head with general thoughts and opinions, what I liked, what I didn't like about the game. So hopefully it's what you're looking for. Maybe it'll convince you to try the game. Maybe it'll convince you to play other games in the Romancing Saga series. And, well, if you guys are ready, let's just sit back, relax, grab your favorite beverage, your favorite snack, and, let's talk about my experiences with SaGa Scarlet Grace Ambitions. All right, here we are. I am sitting down comfortable and cozy on my chair getting ready to talk to you today about SaGa Scarlet Grace Ambitions. This was originally a PlayStation Vita title that was Japanese only for some time. I think not very long. It was, 2016 is when this game originally came out, and then it was later ported to Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, Steam, Android, and iOS. I'm playing the Steam version for this video, just to give you guys a heads up on that. And you might be thinking, okay, so why did you start with SaGa Scarlet Grace Ambitions out of the choices given to you? Well, it's kind of a numbers thing with me. When they said Romancing Saga 2 and 3, and then I see this like standalone title, SaGa Scarlet Grace Ambitions, that to me struck me as something that, okay, maybe it doesn't have a number next to its name, so maybe it's not tied to the other games in some capacity. Although I think, much like other RPGs like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, the other Romancing Sagas are not linked. They're just different numbers because it's the second game, that's the third game, so on and so forth. So I don't think it will really matter, but I always told myself that if I was ever going to go start with the Saga series at some point or another, I would start with the original game, which I actually have a copy of on the PlayStation 2. You might have seen that during the PS2 video. That is a remake of the Super Nintendo game, I want to say. I think all of them are remakes of previous generation games. So I figured for this standalone video, it would be okay to head into this without really experiencing other games. Although, okay, well, it's not technically my first experience with the Saga franchise. Although this is the first time I have given more than an hour or two into the series in any capacity, because my first Saga experience, maybe you heard of this game, it was called Unlimited Saga. This was also on the PlayStation 2. My college roommate introduced this to me around 2005, 2006. I think I can get away with saying this. I ain't like it. I know the Saga games have always, more than other RPGs, have a higher degree of RNG in terms of like combat, movement, and progression in its entirety. But Unlimited Saga went overboard in my eyes, and it wasn't that enjoyable of an experience for me. And that was my first Saga game, so I would say that wasn't exactly a good first impression. But the Saga series is something that's been here technically since the early 90s. It just never got that big of a push in Western markets. In fact, one of the main reasons why I'm doing a video like this is to help raise awareness for it, because for the longest time, the Saga franchise has been kind of in the shadow of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest and other RPGs that just took off around that time. Hell, when this series first started, like over on the West, it wasn't even identified with the Saga name. The first game in the series, around 1989, was relabeled as the Final Fantasy Legend, and the second and third game afterwards would also be called the Final Fantasy Legend, or 2 and 3 respectively. And that was because, as you might have guessed, Final Fantasy was the RPG in the West. That was the one that took off. This was another RPG series under the Square umbrella. I think they wanted to do everything they could to push units, and for a while, the Final Fantasy Legend stuff was the only type of Saga games that we had here in the West. And, I showed you guys earlier that little timeline from that pamphlet that was part of that box. And the information and the numbers don't lie. Japan was getting all of the Saga love because overall it was just more popular over there. So starting with the PS2, and since then, Square has been trying to push the Saga series as an alternative choice for those that maybe want to get something a little more flavorful than Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest. And whether Scarlet Grace Ambitions is a good starting point is something we can discuss as we get started with this video. So in this game, there are 4 possible characters you can start with. Now, as soon as you begin the game, it starts with this bizarre questionnaire, like represented by these comments. Like you get a series of, I think it was like 10 questions asking you about certain scenarios and how you would respond to this or that. The one I immediately think of is like, are you familiar with like the tortoise and the hare? And if you were the tortoise, what would you do to the hare? And like, put him to sleep. So you could just hear the shotgun loading in the background. But depending on your answers, you are given one of the 4 characters. I think if you don't like the choice overall, though, you can like opt to choose another character. I think it's just who they think you're better suited for. In the start of your adventure, I was given Leonard for my opening character. And from what I understand, looking into research for this game, he is considered the most open world character compared to the other 3 characters that you can start with. And I was a little nervous, not gonna lie, because this game throws you out there with like no apologies at all if you start as Leonard, because he has free roam to go pretty much wherever the hell he wants. Now, you are given destinations. In fact, if you decide to go off the beaten pathway, if you want to go east instead of having to go west, the game will tell you, this is not the right way to go, but we're not going to exactly stop you from going there anyway, should you so choose. And I like that sense of freedom. I also like the idea of the game looking out for the newcomer, saying that this is not the right way to go, just to give you a heads up. That's this way. But for my character Leonard, the story altogether, so let me see if I got this right. There is this entity called the Firebringer that is on the verge of coming back. There was once a war against these celestials. I think after a certain time, it's with these standard legends and RPGs, like every so-and-so years, the Firebringer would come back and, it's time to clock in and go to work. And that's where our characters come in. We have to venture around the world for different reasons. Like the overarching story is similar, but the characters have different perspectives, obviously. And in Leonard's case, when he was a child, he had this artifact known as a Scarlet Shard in his possession. Never really exactly understood why he had it, but things get a little weird one day when a mysterious woman shows up. And she is supposedly in the middle of a pilgrimage to seek out these Scarlet Shards and drown them in this mysterious location known as Ihanam, which in the context of this world is like some sort of like make-believe castle that you only hear in children's stories. So folks are not even sure if this thing exists or not. But the woman eventually collapses, and Leonard is one of the most laid-back, nonchalant protagonists I've ever seen in an RPG. Well, in my history of playing RPGs anyway. Like, he's very no nonsense, but at the same time has no problem just saying, okay, you know what? I'm gonna take this girl's place. I'm going to travel the land, going to seek out the Scarlet Shards, and I'm going to drown them in Ihanam. Elizabeth, if you want to come with me, that you do whatever you want to do, and then we're just going to keep going our merry way. I think it's because Leonard, because he had a Scarlet Shard since birth. I think he really just wants to find out what it means to him personally, or maybe he can get some answers if he was like seeking anything out. But Leonard and Elizabeth, like together, the rest of the story for Leonard's perspective is just them doing stuff and reacting to what's happening around him. Is there a Scarlet Shard here? No. Is this where I can find Ihanam? No. Is this Ihanam? No. Is that where Ihanam is? No. What about the Scarlet Shard? If I use it here, we're going to find something here. No. There were recurring elements that pester the two heroes throughout. You have this Earth Serpent that, I swear to Christ, like hounds these two characters like nothing else. You fight this thing. You can fight this thing. You're not saying you have to fight it all the time, but you can fight this thing like 7-8 times total. I think it might show up in like every region that you decide to go across, because again, you can go wherever the hell you want. There is a pathway set for you that if you just want to go to locales which you might think lead you to answers involving Ihanam's location or Scarlet Shards, you can go ahead and just do that if you want to. If not, you can just go across different regions of the map which have their own encounters. It might have the Earth Serpent again. It is all up to you in Leonard's story. And whenever it's story time, it repeats the same beats, which I do find a bit of a weakness with the storytelling in the game overall, because it's strange. So Leonard and Elizabeth are like the two main heroes of this perspective. Like every character in their own chapters is like the main character along with their associate or acquaintance or what have you. And though you are capable of recruiting so many additional heroes to your cause, it is only those two characters that react to anything happening around them. It's kind of the issue I have with Octopath Traveler, where you can have up to 8 characters, but only the character in question for that specific chapter has any say on what's happening on the screen right now. Like, you begin Leonard's story, and you have him, and you have Elizabeth, and there's just 4 other people that are just here for you. I think one of them was like a servant of Elizabeth. There's like a guardian. There's like a mage that grew up with Elizabeth. But there's no like context given to them whatsoever. They're just here for the ride, and that's it. Like they're just names for a party list, and it's so odd because normally I'm used to like characters getting in their own introduction or having a bit more significance in the plot overall. Like every new character you recruit, for the most part, has their own little intro scene, like who they are as an individual, and then after that, they just clam up. While it does help make the current story more centralized between the two protagonists, I feel the lack of developing the other characters, minus some flavor text you can get when you're sending them off their missions and such, limits the potential on satisfying world building, which is really important to me for an RPG. But if you're strictly just for having like the number go up or having more options for your party, because you are going to need those options later down the road when you get to them, then it's good to know that every single area in this game has about maybe 1 or 2 additional characters you can recruit if you do the certain prerequisites. And there is a lot of stuff you can potentially find and a lot of stuff that you could potentially miss, if it means anything at all for that character's chapter. There are events that happen in this game that only triggered because I just happened to go back to this region when I was looking to farm more minerals for like weapon upgrades and all that. Like here's an area that I was traveling around earlier. I caused a flood. I revealed this town that was, well, not a town, but it was a castle underneath this body of water. Now I come back to it just to, again, farm materials, and there's just a giant crab boss here. Like there's nothing to signify that this thing was here. He was just here. And it's a good thing I fought him because I was able to get some pretty neat treasure beating him up. But that kind of stuff is all over the game. You are not going to see everything. You're not going to discover everything on your first playthrough, just given how some things just don't seemingly relate to each other. Like, it honest to God at times feels like it's a roll of the dice on what might happen in this region, if anything happens at all. Like, there are things you can influence. There are things that are... There's a lot of cause and effect in SaGa Scarlet Grace Ambitions. But you have to take the time to go out of your way and react or interact with a lot of things that are not necessarily related to the plot or your current mission objective. You are always encouraged to use a Scarlet Shard to find the most important thing that's happening right now, like that's story related. But farming caves or calming down hot springs, subduing this evil mist that's pouring out from these evil rocks, That is all optional. This game is loaded with side quests. This is most likely because, again, this game did start as a PlayStation Vita title, a handheld. It's not unusual for a game's design on a handheld system to include a lot of bite-sized elements, like side quests. As side quests, that's like the go-to thing to do in a play-on-the-go environment. And no doubt, playing this game on the Switch probably makes that easier to swallow. On a more dedicated console, it does feel a little unfocused, because a good chunk of things to do in the region don't really have anything to do with the main story. They're just objectives for you to do. And if I'm being real, you need to do a lot of it to stand a chance. Oh my God, this game is hard. This is one of the hardest RPGs I've played in a long time. A good chunk of the game can be summed up as you heading to a new region, you visit the local towns close by, and you talk with maybe a few townspeople, get some context for what's happening in the world right now, or maybe a clue to how to trigger a certain side event or a creature or a side character. You visit the smithy, you see what you can make with your current materials, and then you head out and then you interact with other like event flags in the world. This is the entire game, really, and in a way, it does feel a little repetitive given how simplified exploration is in this title. Like, there are no dungeons. Like, this game is mostly fights. It is a gauntlet of fights that will test your knowledge and skill to see if you're capable of doing this or that with maybe in the allotted turns or different stipulations. You pull them off successfully and you reap greater rewards. And it's important that you get a grasp on the idea of how combat and such works, because you do get a lot of stuff for doing battles correctly. And with those materials, you take them back to the shop and you go to the smithy. And there are different kinds of elements for smithies. Like, some can make certain materials with less ingredients depending on what kind of smithy you visit. Because there's so many across the world. And there's even some that have like multiple elements that they favor. So it's just a matter of you exploring and seeing like the best spot to, make weapons and armor for yourself. At least early on, there are no dedicated shops. Like, there is no traditional shops. You don't even get money. You just get materials that you can either use to like trade for other items, or you use to make better items from what you're already wearing. But there is no dedicated buy or sell, at least not what you might expect, because there is an option that you can unlock later on where you're able to trade items that you don't need anymore for other materials. Like, you can get catalysts for upgrading weapons, like crystals and all that sort of thing, which those are a lot of other items needed to upgrade your weapons and armor. But again, you can only do that so many times because you only have so many crystals or leftover items that you can trade in for those kind of things. So most of the time, you're just upgrading what you already have with the surplus of crystals and other items that you can win in battles. And that is something you absolutely need to come to grips with as soon as you start playing the game, because this game does not pull its punches at all. Like, it will give you a warning on like the difficulty of the encounter. Like, there's easy, there's normal, there's hard, and brutal. I think brutal is as high as it gets. And sometimes it is a combination of challenges. Sometimes, most of the time, they're just one-offs, but sometimes it's like one after the other. You are given breaks in between those, so it's not terribly difficult in that regard. It is imperative that you come to grips with that as early as you possibly can. And for the first like 2 dedicated sessions for this, I did not. Like, I was just attacking when I thought it was okay to attack, defending when I needed to defend, and that's it. That works to some degree. And there are some fights where, sometimes just brute strength is the way to go. But the thing about Scarlet Grace Ambitions is that while you are gearing up with different upgrades to your armor, your weapons, you learn new skills the more you use your basic skills, your characters will start to do flashier things. They will be able to attack multiple enemies at once after a certain amount of time has passed. They'll be able to lower defense, lower attack, up their own attack and defense, their focus if they're mages, stun and paralyze, all the basic stuff you would come to expect from an RPG. The thing is, though, enemies also scale up with you. While some encounters are more difficult than others, yes, even the most basic enemies, or at least similar types of enemies that you run into in the first hour of the game, are still giving you similar trouble 12 to 15 hours later. And a lot of this is tied to not only like stats and all that, but also like the main combat mechanics of Scarlet Grace Ambitions. So you can attack and defend and all that. You got these skills that you can use, but all of this requires battle points, BP. It's these stars you see in the user interface. And early on, you only have so many, but the more turns that proceed, the more battle points you earn, which means that more characters can act at once, or you can spend a certain amount of BP on one character's like big attack while the other characters just stand by and either do the small attack or they just straight up defend. Characters that don't act just straight up defend, so they take less damage overall, which you need to do in some cases just to get by some really strong attacks. Enemies can also do this, and they have access to similar skills than you do. And like even like the littlest enemies can do stuff like interrupts or stuns or paralysis, or they just hit you really hard. Like some enemies, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They just punch you in the damn mouth. And the sheer power of those maneuvers, along with any other potential side debuffs, can really put a hamper like on your current formation. And you are heavily encouraged to try out all kinds of different formations. You have like, you can have up to 5 characters in your party at all times, but you can also rearrange how they're situated in the battlefield. You can have them all lined up in a free-for-all session, which I think increases their speed, but no one's really getting any buffs or like advantages in that regard. So probably not the best for your mages and all that. Or you can have one that focuses on like mage power by having them in the back row while your physical fighter is in the front. There are a lot. I unlocked a number of them while playing through the game. Free for all, I ended up liking a lot because I liked the speed of my characters. Because to me, the best strategy in a number of these fights was to kill them before they can kill me, like war of attrition at its finest. But some formations did allow me to breathe a little easier, like heading into some of the more arduous battles where you had to fight like 5 or 6 encounters at once, or you had to deal with a boss or some other enemies who can just summon other adds. And now what was originally a 5-on-1 is now a 5-on-4 or a 5-on-6. Favoring the enemy side. And to make matters more stressful, there's not only health and battle points, there's also life points. I think that's what LP stands for anyway. If a character falls in battle too many times, they're taken out to recharge, forcing you to swap with another character you might have at your disposal, which granted, you probably will, given how many characters you can recruit in this game. But you can't use that character again until you either spend an absurd amount of materials at a back alley doctor's place, or you participate in a number of engagements until the character is ready to go for another round. So if you insist on playing favorites with some of these characters you might grow attached to, make sure you're playing the game well enough so that you don't see them sink to the floor when they fall down too many damn times. Because now you're gonna have to use somebody else for next time. There was never a point in this game where I felt overpowered. Honestly, I felt for the most part I was getting by. Like not struggling, but just getting by. Like I got the basic gist of the combat system. I was getting new skills with repeated use. I managed to recruit some characters that like statistically just seemed better choices from what I had earlier. I remember the witch that I recruited who I thought was a dead ringer for Elsa from Frozen. But she started with a lot of strong magic. It takes a few turns to activate, but I ended up really liking her. She became one of my go-to characters for near the end game stuff. I would say the most important thing to learn and understand how it works is the united attack system. So at the bottom of the battle screen, you can see the upcoming turns, like who's going to act first and all that. And sometimes you might notice like an enemy is in between 2 of your protagonists. And if you manage to kill that enemy in between those 2 heroes, you will then trigger a united attack where all the characters combined together on the timeline will join forces and beat the ever-living hell out of the next enemy up on the timeline. I'm not sure if it was like on the next enemy that's about to attack or it's just chosen at random, but you combine forces and you just mop the floor with them. It's great for damage. On the flip side, enemies can also do this to you. If a hero of yours dies while in between 2 enemies on the timetable, so to speak, they will immediately follow up with a united attack of their own, and that bad scenario just got worse. It is, I swear, it is so easy for battles to spiral out of control just because of you weren't expecting that to do that much damage, or maybe the enemy got a high damage roll, or maybe, and this happened a lot, there are enemies that will plan an interrupt or plan a counter attack. Sometimes you might notice enemies have like these 3 question marks below their icon. And that means that's a counterattack, but you don't know exactly what counterattack they're going to do. It could be something reacting to physical attack, maybe something that reacts to a magical skill. You don't know. It is a roll of the dice. unless you decide to not act any at all for that turn and just let that turn pass by, because they won't attack unless they trigger their counterattack. So that's a tip I can give you for that one. And make no mistake, you too can also do stuff like that. There are interrupts that you can do. Some of my favorites being from Elizabeth, where she can interrupt different types of attacks, like blunt attacks and like piercing attacks. I love Elizabeth. Elizabeth ended up being one of my favorite characters like in the game, because I loved her utility in that regard, and I think she had some of the best AoE attacks before I'm already blanking on her name, the witch, Elsa from Frozen. This game feels a lot better as you're playing through it, as you're learning these new techniques, as you're recruiting more characters, and as you're getting all these special, scenario attacks where you can paralyze, you can stun, you can interrupt characters, and everything just goes according to plan. Then you wrap it up with a nice united attack. Maybe luck will be on your side and you'll get a benison, which can have different effects depending on the formation you're using, like higher attacks, so you can get healed for once, because there's no dedicated heal options in this at first. Like something as simple as just restoring HP or restoring characters to life, those are limited to just certain abilities from certain characters, and I think they need certain weapons to even do that sort of thing. But like dedicated healing options, like at first, nada. You have to rely on benisons like that. And I will say that in terms of like the battle system is my biggest gripe with this game. The game somewhat tries to circumvent this by fully restoring your health at the end of each battle. But like in the heat of battle, doing something as simple as restoring health is a little harder than I feel it needed to be. It requires some real eyebrow-raising workarounds. There are more elements in this battle system that I feel are too heavily RNG dependent than I'm comfortable with. Because even when I do grasp how the battle system works, and I've gotten to the end where I fought the Firebringer, there were an immeasurable amount of game overs that I suffered just because of bad luck. And I'm not big on that. I'm really not that big on it. Like, I can understand not just understanding the battle system. That's my fault. That's always going to be my fault. And rest assured, there were plenty of times where that happened. Make no mistake. But even on my best runs, there were times where I was just fine until I had a string of really shitty rolls or really shitty instances of RNG, and everything just fell apart. And I don't like that. And there were a lot of times I felt that happened in this game. And I would say that is probably my biggest warning I can give you for this game, should you decide to pick it up, is that even on your best runs, things can get out of hand just from the smallest things, like the domino effect. It could be a high damage roll. It could be an enemy's debuff going off at the most inopportune time. And these are all risks that you take in other RPGs, to be fair, but I feel it is way more prevalent in this game in particular. Bad luck can break battles so fast. That said, I was still able to continue playing the game. I was still able to get that progression done. I was able to learn all these new abilities. I saw my characters getting stronger, and as always, that is a good way of just invigorating me and saying, okay, you're doing something right. Keep going. And let's see where else this journey takes us. It helps that you have your fundamental RPG elements, like your stats, your formations, the kind of techniques you can learn, your roles, and how that influences your strength, your magic, your defense, all that sort of stuff. But one thing that this game in particular really does well is like showing you the ropes and how this works or how that works. There is an extensive menu in this game that's just dedicated to giving you tips on when you unlock new mechanics or how these techniques can influence the tide of the battle. I heavily encourage, should you decide to pick up this game, check your tips every other like waking session. Like every time you fight a new boss, every time you go into a new region, every time you go into a new town or you talk to somebody, there's likely a new tip that's available that can give you some insight on some mechanics that you probably didn't see beforehand. And if you do your reading on that one, you'll pick up the game's mechanics quite easily. I mean, you'll understand exactly how to utilize united attacks effectively. You'll get an idea of how repeatedly using certain skills will not only unlock stronger skills or different skills, but how you increase the rank of those abilities so they don't take as many battle points to activate and give you more battle points to use for other attacks or means of defense. This game doesn't hide anything from you. It doesn't do any of that cheap stuff to artificially increase the difficulty. No, everything is at your disposal. You just have to make the effort to understand it. Is it more than what I think other RPGs ask for? Yes, easily. Again, one of the hardest RPGs I've played in a long time. And a lot of it was admittedly fighting off muscle memory of other RPGs that I've played throughout the years. And that's not this game or the Saga franchise's fault. This is just their way of doing it. It is a matter, though, of whether or not you are willing to deal with it or cope with it and adjust as needed to get the most out of it. If so, I could recommend SaGa Scarlet Grace Ambitions. Just prepare to get your ass kicked a lot, because your ass will get kicked a lot. And especially in the case of Leonard's scenario, check everything. Like, you're in this, you can beat this game, like just going from point A to point B, I think in about 4 or 5 hours. Like, you can beat Leonard's scenario that quickly, just going from point A to point B. But the world is your oyster. In any scenario, the world is your oyster. So no matter what, just explore all those caves, explore all those floodgates, those creatures you might see roaming down. Fight a lot. I mean, that's most of this game. Like 95% of this game is battles. And that could be a turnoff, admittedly. If for RPGs, you want a little more story to be involved with your battling and all that. And that's not exactly what Scarlet Grace does a whole lot anyway. It is repetitive by design, yes. I feel the presentation is a little stilted on top of that, because I think that's just a holdover from it being originally a PlayStation Vita game. Again, there are no dungeons. You don't really explore towns. Like, you visit towns, but it's all menus. Like, it's like Sonic Unleashed on the Wii, where you just like talk to portraits and you visit like the smithy to scroll down menus and all that. It is not a very immersive world that you can lose yourself in, because a lot of it is just pop-up pictures that you see just by like running around the world. You run really fast too. You know, a lot of this game is go here, fight this, go here, fight this. Very fundamental structure this game has. And I know to some that might be too simple. And yeah, in my eyes, it is at points. It is still more than playable. Again, I was able to get to the final battle. I got my ass kicked, but I did get there, damn it. I don't know, this game is tough. I hear it's one of the more accessible Saga games in the franchise, so I'm wondering, oh my God, what are the other games like? You know, the presentation I mentioned, like the overworld stuff is stilted, but I think like the character animations, like in battles, they all look great. I think characters all have a really colorful presence to them. Expressions are pretty solid. Music was really great. I enjoyed the boss battle themes the most. There's a couple of them that you hear throughout, and a few are really just immediately clicked. Like you get the animation with the glimmer whenever you learn a new ability or whenever your rank goes up for a new ability. That's the same kind of reaction I had when I heard some of these boss battle themes for the first time. I was like, oh yeah, this is an instant slapper. So yeah, obviously I want to thank Square for giving me a code to experience SaGa Scarlet Grace Ambitions. Again, it's now widely available on the Switch, PlayStation 4, it's on PC, and it's on mobile devices as well. I'd say approach with caution if you're not down for a more punishing RPG that's a little heavy on the RNG elements. But if you're willing to stick with it, it is also pretty fulfilling. Again, that is a major reason why I decided to stick through with it, because there are times where if I'm playing a game that I find is too hard, I was like, man, screw this. No, I wanted to push through with the Leonard story, especially because I was seeing the progression. I was seeing myself get stronger, or at least having a better understanding of how this works. And, you know, I've said time and time again, I consider myself an absolute simpleton when it comes to RPG specifically. You know, to me, my idea of high IQ strategy is thunder on the water creature, because water conducts electricity. Overload him. Yeah. Woo. I am master RPG player. No, this game asks a little more than that. They want you to consider combinations of attacks and how that's going to chain into other things that'll lead to victory overall, if the enemy hasn't already done that to you. But I'm telling you, man, once you understand that and you get those turns where everything just comes up Millhouse, attacks are connecting, enemies are dying, and then it all wraps up with a united attack because you did it, you understood how it worked. That's a really good feeling. And I wanted to get more of that feeling throughout, and I did. More than enough times. Common fodder, bosses. It happened more times than me getting face planted on the ground. So with that said, again, cautious recommend, but it is a recommend. And that's where I'm going to end things for tonight. Again, very unorthodox way of doing a versus video for once. Check the description down below if you're interested in playing the game for yourself, or if you're interested in the Romancing Saga Reuniverse game for mobile devices. Hey, if you ended up enjoying your time with the game, you can find some familiar characters like Urpina and such in Romancing Saga Reuniverse. Though this game's combat visuals are more closely related to games like Romancing Saga 3, Gameplay elements and challenges from Scarlet Grace Ambitions are also part of the experience, so it should be an easy transition if you move from one game to the next. Here's the end card to check previous videos. I appreciate your time and support. Again, I don't get these opportunities to do videos like this without you guys continuously watching my stuff, and hopefully I can pay you back with a good recommendation of SaGa Scarlet Grace Ambitions. Have a good night, everybody. Take care, stay safe, wash your hands, wear a mask if you decide to go outside and all that. I'll see you guys for the next video.